Who's flying that helicopter? That's impossible. It's ours. The radio crackled with panic as searchlights swept across the prison camp. Guards scattered in confusion because from the dark mountain sky came the thunder of rotor blades. And it wasn't rescue. It was revenge. Just 3 days earlier, they had laughed at a captured pilot, beaten, shackled, and thrown into a cold cell. To them, she was broken, a powerless prisoner. But now their own Mi-24 Hind roared above them, missiles armed, cannons blazing. And at the controls sat the woman they underestimated, Captain Nadia Falcon Rains. This is not just a story of survival. It's the tale of how captivity turned into the deadliest weapon her enemies had ever seen. They called her Falcon, but long before the military painted that name on her flight helmet, she was just Nadia Rains, a girl growing up under the wide-open skies of Texas. Out there, the horizon stretched forever, and to her, the sky was never just background. It was a challenge. It was a calling. Her father, Colonel William Rains, had been a decorated Army aviator who flew helicopters in Vietnam. He carried the quiet weight of war in his eyes, but to young Nadia, he carried something else: discipline, resilience, and a deep respect for the craft of flying. He never talked about combat as glory. He spoke about it as responsibility. The responsibility to carry lives, to protect soldiers on the ground, and to make split-second choices that meant survival or tragedy. When other kids were riding bikes down dusty streets, Nadia was climbing into the cockpit of her father's old UH-1 Huey parked on their property. It didn't even fly anymore, but that didn't matter. To her, every switch, every gauge, every worn leather seat cushion told a story. She would sit for hours pretending she was flying, listening to her father's stories about what each control did, how a helicopter responds not just to hands and feet, but to the instincts of the pilot. Her father taught her something most people overlook. Helicopters are not machines you command. They are machines you negotiate with. They hover. They fight against wind and gravity. They respond to stress. And in those moments when things go wrong, it's not about who's stronger. It's about who adapts faster. That philosophy would later save Nadia's life more times than she could count. By the time she was 17, she wasn't just dreaming of flying. She was engineering it. She studied mechanical systems, pulling apart old engines in the garage, understanding how gears, rotors, and hydraulics worked. Her classmates saw her as the quiet girl with grease on her hands. But her father saw something else, a future pilot who wasn't just going to fly by instinct, but also by knowledge. And that mattered, because combat flying is not a video game. It's three-dimensional chess at 200 miles per hour. Nadia believed in her father's philosophy. Flying isn't just about control sticks and engines. It's about thinking in 3 dimensions, where every move has a consequence and every second decides lives. Her journey into the Army aviation branch wasn't easy. At flight school, she was underestimated. Instructors saw a young woman with sharp eyes but doubted her endurance. Male cadets whispered she'd wash out in a week. But every drill, every obstacle, Nadia turned into fuel. While others got frustrated at the grueling simulators, she stayed late, running scenarios again and again. When others panicked under engine failure drills, she stayed calm, thinking like her father had taught her, negotiating with the aircraft, not fighting it. There was a defining moment in her training. During a live exercise, a sudden wind shear almost flipped her helicopter on its side. Most trainees would have frozen or overcorrected and crashed. Nadia didn't either. She let the helicopter talk, felt the stress through the stick, adjusted, and recovered. The instructors couldn't believe it. That day, one veteran pilot muttered under his breath, "That girl flies like a falcon." The call sign stuck. What's striking about Nadia's story isn't just her talent, it's her mindset. She didn't crave glory, she craved mastery. She wasn't chasing medals, she was chasing precision. And that's what made her dangerous. Because enemies often think war is about brute force. Nadia knew it was about intellect, patience, and daring to think differently when everyone else panicked. And so, from the wide skies of Texas to the unforgiving cockpit of an Apache, Nadia Rains became Falcon. Not because she was the fastest or the strongest, but because she saw what others missed. She thought in 3 dimensions, lived by instinct, and refused to break under pressure. What her enemies would never understand, until it was too late, was that a woman who learns to survive the storm doesn't just fly through it, she owns it. The mission began like so many others. Routine, almost quiet. Reconnaissance flights rarely carried the thunder of direct combat, but for Captain Nadia, Falcon Reigns, routine never meant safe. The Apache's twin rotors cut through the dense night air as she and her co-pilot, Lieutenant Aaron Cole, skimmed treetops deep in hostile territory. Their orders were simple: confirm enemy supply routes, map hidden artillery nests, and return before dawn. Cole, younger and less hardened than Nadia, leaned slightly back in his seat, eyes scanning the digital readouts. "Falcon, you think Command even realizes how exposed this valley is?" he asked through the headset. Nadia's steel-gray eyes didn't leave the terrain flashing beneath them. "Command doesn't fly this low. We do. Keep your eyes sharp, Aaron." For a few minutes, silence filled the cockpit, broken only by the hum of engines and the pulse of instruments. It felt like a hunt, until the hunters realized they'd become prey. The first warning was subtle, a faint electronic ping, barely audible. Nadia's instincts screamed before the onboard system did. "Missile lock!" she barked. In seconds, the world exploded into chaos. Multiple surface-to-air missile launches lit up the dark horizon like jagged bolts of lightning. "Flares out!" Cole shouted, deploying countermeasures. Bright decoys streaked through the night, but the enemy had planned this trap well. These weren't random launches. It was a coordinated ambush. New SAM batteries hidden under camouflage, waiting for an Apache exactly like hers. The first missile slammed into the earth 50 meters off their nose, rocking the helicopter violently. The second struck near the tail, shredding stabilizers. The cockpit filled with alarms, flashing red across every panel. Nadia fought the controls, teeth gritted. "Hold on!" Cole didn't get the chance. A third missile detonated close enough to pepper the cockpit with shrapnel. His cry was short, cut off as jagged metal tore through his side. Nadia turned for half a heartbeat, just long enough to see the life drain from his eyes. She had flown hundreds of missions, survived countless firefights, but nothing compared to watching a co-pilot die in the seat beside her. Her face burned from embedded shards of glass, her left arm numb, but she forced the Apache into auto-rotation. Training kicked in, not panic. "Negotiate with the aircraft, don't fight it," her father's voice echoed in memory. The rotors whined as she coaxed the crippled helicopter into a controlled descent. Below, enemy ground fire traced lines of red into the night. Bullets tore through foliage as Nadia steered toward the only clearing visible. The impact rattled through her bones as the Apache slammed down hard, skidding across dirt and stone before shuddering to a violent halt. Silence lasted no more than 2 seconds before shadows closed in. Dozens of enemy soldiers surged from the tree line, rifles raised. Nadia tried to reach for her sidearm, but her blood-slick hand betrayed her. She stumbled out of the cockpit, knees buckling, chest heaving with pain. Cole's lifeless body remained strapped in his seat. The thought of leaving him there was a wound deeper than any shrapnel. The butt of a rifle struck her across the back, forcing her to the ground. Boots surrounded her. Foreign voices barked orders. Shackles bit into her wrists. "Pilot alive," one soldier confirmed. Another laughed cruelly, dragging her to her feet. They didn't see a warrior. They saw a bargaining chip, an intelligence asset, a symbol they could break. By dawn, Nadia was delivered through winding forest roads to a fortress-like compound. Thick barbed wire crowned high walls. Guard towers pierced the mist with sweeping spotlights. This was no ordinary prison. It was designed for high-value captives, the kind who knew too much. At the center of it all waited Commander Viktor Dragunov. Dragunov was a man carved from stone and shadow. Broad-shouldered, cold-eyed, his reputation for psychological warfare was whispered even among his own men. He studied Nadia with detached curiosity as guards shoved her into the interrogation room. "A pilot," he said slowly in accented English, his tone almost amused. "They told me Americans train women to fly machines of war. I thought it was exaggeration. And yet," he gestured at her torn flight suit, "here you are, a falcon with broken wings." Nadia stood as straight as her chains allowed. blood drying along her cheek. Captain Nadia reigns. Serial number 42301. Nothing more. Dragunov smirked. He had broken countless prisoners before, extracting tactical secrets drop by drop. To him, she was no different. Another name, another rank, another set of procedures to unravel. "We will see," he said coldly. "They all break eventually." She was shoved into a dim cell with concrete walls that smelled of rust and damp earth. Shackles pinned her to the floor. Outside, guards laughed. Somewhere in the camp, a helicopter's rotor thumped, mocking her with the sound of freedom just out of reach. Nadia closed her eyes. Pain radiated through her body. Grief for Cole weighed heavy, but her mind did not collapse. She repeated the words drilled into her in survival training. Resist, observe, endure. To Dragunov, she looked broken. To the guards, she looked powerless. But inside, Captain Nadia Falcon Rains was calculating, and the cage they thought would contain her was already becoming her battlefield. The interrogations became routine, at least for Commander Viktor Dragunov. He enjoyed them. The performance of control, the cat-and-mouse game where he believed he always had the final word. But for Captain Nadia Falcon Rains, every session was not about enduring, it was about gathering. She sat shackled to the metal chair, the bulb above buzzing faintly. Dragunov leaned forward, voice dripping with mock concern. "Your name, rank, and serial number," he demanded. Nadia's eyes didn't waver. "Captain Nadia Rains, serial number 42301. "And your unit?" he pressed. Silence. That silence was her shield. Each time Dragunov tried a new tactic, insults, threats, psychological games, she returned to the same rhythm. Name, rank, serial number. He thought her stubbornness a weakness, a refusal to adapt. In reality, she was adapting far more than he realized. Because while he thought she was breaking, Nadia was watching. Every escort to the interrogation room revealed details. The weight of a guard's boots, the sloppy timing of a shift change, the way one soldier's hands shook from too much caffeine. She memorized accents, footsteps, and who coughed in the cold. From her cell, she observed through the narrow slot of a window. The eastern towers overlapped their searchlights only briefly, leaving a 6-second gap of darkness. Dogs barked each night as helicopters came and went, meaning they were used to the machines but not to stealthy human movement. She logged those seconds, those barks, those patterns like entries in a mental journal. Most of all, she listened to the rotors. To anyone else, the deep chop of the Mi-24 Hind was just noise. To her, it was a language. She could tell which engines strained, which pilots landed rough, which birds came in on schedule and which returned late. They circled the camp in predictable arcs, landing on the same pad for refuel. Predictability to a pilot like Nadia meant vulnerability. Other prisoners noticed her calm. At night, when whispers passed between bunks, one leaned toward her. "Why don't you fight back? Why don't you curse them like the rest of us?" Nadia's reply was soft but sharp. "Because fighting now is suicide, but fighting later, that's survival." Her silence during interrogations frustrated Dragunov. He mocked her heritage, taunted her with lies about fellow soldiers, even described Lieutenant Aaron Cole's death in gruesome detail. Still, she didn't flinch. Every word he spat was fuel, hardening her resolve. In her mind, she drew the compound as if it were a flight map. Towers, walls, blind spots, guard routines. She could almost see it from above, as though already piloting a helicopter over it. What Dragunov mistook for blank defiance was in truth tactical patience. She recalled her father's lesson. A pilot who only looks forward crashes. The one who sees all angles survives. 3 days into captivity, Nadia already knew more about the camp than some of the guards. She had memorized the pulse of its defenses, the tempo of its routines. Dragunov believed he had her caged. What he didn't realize was that cages have seams, and seams can be broken. To him, she was silent. To the guards, powerless. But inside, Nadia was already aloft, circling like a falcon above prey, waiting for the precise moment to strike. Night fell heavy over the compound. The barracks were silent except for the faint clink of chains and the occasional cough of exhausted men. Yet under that silence, whispers stirred, whispers of escape. Sergeant Daniel Reeve, the senior POW, had spent weeks sketching out a plan in his head. A veteran of special operations, he carried the responsibility of keeping morale alive. One evening, while the guard's footsteps faded during shift change, he leaned toward a small circle of prisoners and spoke in low tones. "Tomorrow night we move," he said. "East fence line, weakest section. We hit the guards during the change. Get through the wire and vanish into the forest. If we stay low and fast, we can be over the ridge by dawn." For the starved and battered men, the idea of running through the woods sounded like salvation. Nods of agreement spread around the group. Better to die moving than rot in chains. But Nadia, sitting quietly against the wall, raised her head. Her voice, calm but sharp, cut through the hopeful murmurs. "You won't make it past sunrise." The group turned to her, some scowling. Reeve narrowed his eyes. "Got a better idea, Captain? Or are you just here to remind us we're screwed?" Nadia leaned forward, her steel-gray eyes steady. "Running on foot. They'll unleash dogs. Helicopters will track you with thermal imaging. In 6 hours, maybe less, you'll be cornered in the valleys." "That's not escape, Sergeant. That's suicide." Tension bristled. One of the younger soldiers muttered, "And what do you suggest? We sprout wings?" A faint smile touched Nadia's lips. "Not wings. Rotors. We don't run from their helicopters. We take one." The room fell silent. At first, the prisoners thought she was joking. Then they realized she wasn't. "You're insane," another snapped. "We can barely stand, and you want us to hijack a Hind gunship?" Reeves studied her carefully. "Even if we did, you've never flown one. Russian systems, different controls. How could you possibly—" "I've flown Apaches for 7 years," Nadia interrupted. Her tone was steady, almost clinical. "The principles are the same. Lift, torque, collective, cyclic. Once you understand how a helicopter thinks, the rest is details. I know their patrol patterns. I know where they land. At the refuel pad, security is thin. If we hit them then, I can fly it out." The men exchanged glances, torn between disbelief and a spark of dangerous hope. One prisoner shook his head. "If you're wrong, we all die." Nadia's gaze locked onto his. "If we run, you're already dead. If we fly, we have a chance. Maybe the only one." Her words sank into the silence like a blade. Reeves' jaw tightened. For 3 weeks, he had carried the weight of leadership, keeping the men alive on scraps of food and fading hope. He wanted to dismiss her, but something in her voice stopped him. It wasn't bravado. It was certainty. He leaned closer, voice low. "You're asking me to gamble 12 lives on your instincts, Captain." Nadia didn't blink. "I'm asking you to trust the only thing I've ever done better than anyone else, flying." The group held its breath. Then Reeve exhaled slowly, eyes scanning the men. He saw it there, in their faces, the shift. They weren't looking at him anymore. They were looking at her. Finally, he nodded. "All right, Falcon, we do it your way. But God help us if you're wrong." The room exhaled as if life had just returned. Whispers turned into plans. Who would strike the guards? Who would secure weapons? Who would cover the landing pad? For the first time, they weren't thinking like prisoners. They were thinking like soldiers again. Nadia sat back against the wall, eyes closing briefly. She could already see it. The Hind descending, the crew stepping out, the brief window of vulnerability, her hands on the controls, the rotors carrying them out. The plan was insane, reckless, audacious. But sometimes the only way to survive was to think like no one else dared. And that was why it just might work. The night air was thick with mist when the plan unfolded. Hours of waiting, watching, and whispering came down to this moment. The prisoners moved like shadows, guided by Sergeant Reeves' hand signals. Their bodies tense, their eyes locked on the distant glow of floodlights near the landing pad. Nadia's heart beat steady. To anyone else, it would feel like a drum of panic, but to her, it was rhythm. She had lived by rhythm all her life. The pulse of rotor blades, the timing of maneuvers, the heartbeat of machines. Tonight, the rhythm meant survival. From beyond the tree line came the sound she had been waiting for. The deep, thunderous chop of the Mi-24 Hind returning from patrol. The men froze, some with eyes wide in dread. To them, it was the sound of the hunter. To Nadia, it was opportunity. The Hind descended into the landing zone, its searchlight sweeping lazily across the compound. Dust and debris swirled as its wheels kissed the ground. The crew climbed out casually, helmets under their arms, oblivious to the eyes fixed on them from the dark. Guards nearby barely paid attention. They had done this 100 times. Nadia whispered, "Now." The prisoners surged. They were starving, bruised, underfed. But desperation is its own kind of strength. Reeve and two others slammed into the closest guards, wresting rifles from their hands. Another pair attacked the stunned helicopter crew before they could raise alarm. The clash was brutal, quick, silent except for the thud of fists and muffled grunts. Within moments, the landing pad was theirs. Nadia sprinted forward, lungs burning, every nerve alive. She had visualized this moment 100 times, but the reality hit like a surge of electricity. The Hind loomed before her, massive and menacing, painted in enemy markings. Its metal skin still radiated heat from flight, the cockpit glass reflecting searchlights. She climbed into the pilot's seat, sliding into controls utterly foreign, yet strangely familiar. Her fingers brushed switches, levers, gauges. Different layout, different language on the dials, but principles never change. Lift, torque, collective, cyclic. It was still a helicopter, still a machine that demanded respect and control. Her hands moved quickly, instinctively. Battery on, fuel pumps engaged, turbines spooling. The cockpit vibrated with life as rotors began to turn overhead, whining into a deafening roar. Prisoners piled in behind her, cramming into the cabin, clutching captured rifles. Reeve leaned over her shoulder. "You sure about this?" Nadia didn't look up. Her eyes scanned instruments, memorizing readings, cross-checking against what she knew. "I don't have to be sure, I just have to fly." The Hind trembled, rotors slicing the night. Enemy soldiers across the compound finally realized something was wrong. Shouts erupted, spotlights swung toward the pad. Muzzle flashes sparked as gunfire ripped through the air. Bullets pinged against armor plating. "Falcon, we've got company," Reeve shouted. "Then let's get off the ground." Nadia pulled the collective. The Hind shuddered, fought her hands, then obeyed. Slowly, agonizingly, it lifted off, straining under the sudden load of extra passengers. Nadia coaxed it higher, using every ounce of training, every instinct from thousands of flight hours. The helicopter bucked, but she steadied it. Gunfire intensified, tracer rounds streaking past. A rocket-propelled grenade whooshed from the perimeter wall. Nadia banked hard, the Hind groaning as it tilted, the projectile screaming past into the trees. The prisoners in the cabin clung to each other, wide-eyed, some whispering prayers. But Nadia was calm. For the first time since her capture, she was in her element. The cockpit wasn't a cage, it was freedom. The Hind climbed higher. Searchlights struggled to track it, beams sweeping too slowly. Below, guards scrambled in panic. Nadia's voice crackled through the headset, cold and steady. "They thought we'd run. Instead, we're flying." She flipped arming switches, her hands moving with precision. The Hind's weapon systems hummed awake. Cannons ready, rockets locked. The same helicopter built to hunt prisoners had become their sword. Reeve stared at her, almost in disbelief. "You're really going to do it, aren't you?" Nadia's eyes burned with a fierce calm. "We're not just escaping, we're ending this place." The Hind leveled, rotors thundering, guns primed. Below, the camp that had shackled them minutes before looked suddenly small, fragile. The Falcon had taken the sky. The Mi-24 Hind thundered into the night sky, its massive rotors shaking the air. For a moment, there was silence in the camp below. A stunned pause, as though reality hadn't caught up with what had just happened. The prisoners were airborne. The hunters had become prey. Then chaos erupted. Searchlights whipped upward, guards screamed orders, and bursts of gunfire clawed at the dark. But Nadia Falcon Rains had already set her course. She leveled the helicopter, scanning the glowing compound below. Every tower, every gate, every corner of barbed wire, she knew them all. She had mapped the camp in her mind, cell by cell, guard by guard. Now she would use that map not as a prisoner, but as a pilot. Hang on, she called back to the men crammed in the cabin. Her hands moved with precision over unfamiliar switches, but her instincts carried her. We're not flying away just yet. Reeve gripped a handrail, eyes wide. Falcon, what the hell are you doing? Nadia's reply was ice cold. Making sure this place never cages another soldier again. She banked hard left, the hind groaning under the maneuver. From her vantage point, the prison camp looked exposed, defenseless. She toggled the cannon systems, her thumb brushing the trigger. The first burst of fire stitched across the ground, tearing through guard towers in an eruption of sparks and screams. Floodlights shattered, plunging parts of the compound into darkness. The prisoners in the cabin roared, fear mixing with exhilaration. For once, they weren't victims watching from behind bars. They were witnesses to justice. Down below, Commander Viktor Dragunov staggered into the communications bunker. His face, usually carved in calm cruelty, twisted in panic. He seized a radio handset. This is Dragunov. How are prisoners flying our helicopter? Who allowed this? Static hissed before Nadia's voice cut across the same frequency. Calm, steady, unmistakable. This is Captain Nadia Rains, she said, her tone like steel wrapped in fire. And I'm flying your bird now. There was a pause on the line, the silence of disbelief turning into dread. Dragunov shouted into the radio, his composure slipping. You'll never make it out alive. We'll shoot you down. Nadia's eyes narrowed as she lined up another strafing run. Her voice was calm, almost detached. You already tried. You failed. She pulled the trigger again. Rockets streaked from the pylons, slamming into the motor pool. The ground shook as fuel trucks erupted in fireballs, sending flames into the sky. Ammunition stores cooked off in chain reactions, blasting holes into the earth. The camp dissolved into chaos. Guards fled in every direction, some trying to man anti-aircraft guns, others dropping weapons to save themselves. But it was too late. Every second they hesitated, Nadia struck another target. A tower, a barracks, the kennel where attack dogs had once snarled at prisoners in chains. The hind became an avenging beast, and she was its soul. Inside the cockpit, sweat streaked down her temple, blood from earlier wounds still clinging to her face. But her hands were steady, her breathing even. She wasn't flying for survival anymore. She was flying for vengeance, for coal, for every soldier who had screamed inside those walls. Dragunov's voice returned on the radio, desperate now. You can't win, Falcon. You're outnumbered, outgunned. Nadia pressed the transmit button, her gaze fixed on the inferno below. That's the difference between you and me, Commander. You see numbers. I see angles. And angles win wars. Her words cut deeper than any missile. One final rocket slammed into the command post. The building erupted in fire, glass and steel raining down. Dragunov's scream was swallowed by static as the transmission died. For a moment, Nadia allowed herself silence. The hind hovered, its silhouette framed by fire and smoke rising from the shattered camp. What had been a fortress minutes before was now a graveyard of arrogance. In the cabin, the prisoners watched in stunned awe. Some cheered, others sat in silence, tears in their eyes. They weren't just escaping anymore. They had witnessed something impossible. Nadia exhaled slowly, fingers easing on the controls. Her voice, calm as ever, carried back through the cabin intercom. Hold tight. Now, we go home. The hind banked away from the burning prison, slipping low into the valleys, hugging the terrain to avoid radar. Behind them, the camp smoldered, a symbol reduced to ash. For Nadia, captivity had not broken her. It had armed her. The cage meant to silence her had instead given her the perfect vantage point to strike. And in that moment, Captain Nadia, Falcon Rains, proved a truth Dragunov would never live to understand. Sometimes the deadliest weapon isn't the machine itself. It's the prisoner who learns how to fly it. The roar of the Mi-24 hind faded as its wheels touched down on friendly soil. Soldiers rushed forward, weapons ready, confused by the enemy helicopter breaking into their perimeter. But confusion turned into stunned silence when ragged American POWs spilled out of the cabin, their faces hollow yet alive. And then she emerged. Captain Nadia, Falcon Rains, stepped down from the cockpit, helmet tucked under her arm, her torn flight suit streaked with blood and dust. Despite the exhaustion etched into her body, she carried herself with a quiet authority that silenced the landing zone. In that moment, she wasn't just a pilot. She was living proof that captivity could not cage the human spirit. News of the escape spread like wildfire. Reporters called it the impossible flight. Soldiers whispered about it in chow lines and barracks. For many, Nadia became more than a name. She was a reminder that resilience could turn defeat into victory. Months later, standing in full-dress uniform, she received her promotion. The medal pinned to her chest glittered in the sunlight, but her eyes remained steady, thoughtful. She didn't fight for glory that night in the Hind. She fought for survival, for the men beside her, for the principle that no soldier should be forgotten in chains. When offered her next command, she chose a different path. Nadia asked to return to the training grounds, not as a combat pilot, but as an instructor. She wanted to teach the next generation what captivity had taught her: patience, observation, and the ability to adapt when everything seemed lost. At the Survival, Evasion, Resistance, and Escape SEER school, she stood before young aviators, their eyes wide as they recognized the legend. Yet she spoke not of medals or missions, but of silence, of studying the enemy, of turning fear into calculation. She told them the truth. Strength isn't just about firepower. It's about thinking when no one else can. At the end of every course, she left them with one final lesson. Her voice was calm, steady, almost a whisper. Some prisoners are more dangerous in captivity than they ever were in freedom. The room would always fall silent, the weight of her words sinking in, because they all knew. She wasn't speaking about history. She was speaking about possibility. And so, the legacy of Falcon lived on. Not in the steel of the Hind she once stole, nor in the medals on her chest, but in the eyes of every young soldier she trained. Soldiers who would one day face their own cages and remember her example. For Nadia Rains, captivity was never the end. It was only the beginning of flight. Captain Nadia Falcon Rains' story is more than a tale of war. It's a reminder that the hardest prisons we face are not always made of steel and barbed wire. In today's America, captivity can look like debt, illness, loneliness, or the quiet weight of being underestimated. Yet Nadia teaches us that resilience can transform even the darkest place into a starting point for victory. Her defiance reminds us that sometimes the battles we fight in silence, in hospitals, at kitchen tables, or in our own hearts, can be just as defining as battles fought on foreign soil. And her words echo with meaning. Some prisoners are more dangerous in captivity than they ever were in freedom. Nako? So I ask you, do you believe adversity makes us stronger, or does it simply reveal the strength we already had inside? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Your voice may inspire someone else tonight. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. If her story moved you, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs hope. Because courage, like freedom, is a gift we pass forward.